Hey there, welcome back to Secret Histories. I'm Brian Keene, and in this series, we sit on the floor in my office, very low tech, very bootleg, just me and a very shaky handheld iPhone. And we go through my books in the order that they were published, and I talk about each one, the origin story, so to speak, the history of the book, where I got the idea, what went into its creation, what it did for my career, where it stands in our genre's history. Today, we're going to be talking about Kill Whitey, which was originally published by Cemetery Dance, later on reprinted by Deadite Press. In talking about Kill Whitey, we are also going to talk about Killing Stages, which was a supplemental chapbook available to people who bought the lettered edition of Kill Whitey. The lettered and the signed limited edition of Kill Whitey from Cemetery Dance. Now, why are we talking about this supplemental chapbook? Well, because this consists of material that was cut from Kill Whitey, an original first chapter that is very different from the published first chapter. Something else it contains is an introduction in which I talk about the origin of Kill Whitey, and I'd like to read a couple excerpts of that from you. Kill Whitey began, as many of my stories do, with me being drunk. I wasn't the only one. We were all drunk. Tim Lebbon, Tom Piccirilli, John Urbancik, Mike Oliveri, Michael T. Huyck, all writers, and you know how much writers love to drink, especially horror writers. The only one of us who wasn't drunk that night was Geoff Cooper, and even he was reeling from a contact buzz. I then go on to talk about a few other things before getting back to it. As I said, I'm not going to read the whole thing, just excerpts. Anyway, we'd been drinking, as we often did back in those days. Pause while Brian turns the page with one hand, very deftly. Back when we were young and hungry and had yet to sell our individual novels and thus enter the long, heart-wrenching, demoralizing process that is the publishing business. Back then, we wanted to be writers because we didn't know any better. We were at some dimly remembered convention in some long forgotten city. It might have been Seattle or Denver. And we got the idea for the greatest action movie ever made. And we were going to be the ones to collectively write it. The cast involved Clint Eastwood, Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Christopher Walken, Keith David, Harvey Keitel, Lee Van Cleef, Mickey Rourke, Samuel L. Jackson, Bruce Lee, Jet Li, Fred Williamson, Steve McQueen, Jack Nicholson, Lee Marvin, John Wayne, Kurt Russell, Lee Marvin again, Mel Gibson, Sylvester Stallone, and Chuck Norris as the Beaver. The plot, such as it was, involved putting these actors together on set and letting them shoot guns at each other for 2.5 hours. There would be lots of explosions, and the title was perfect. The title was called Fuck Around Quotient Zero. Now, I'm going to pause from reading again to point out, this was years and years and years before a little movie called The Expendables got made. Did someone who worked on The Expendables happen to read this introductory essay from Killing Stages? I don't know. But The Expendables is a lot like Fuck Around Quotient Zero and what we had envisioned. Some different actors, obviously, because most of those people were dead by the time Expendables was filmed. But I digress. Back to the reading. Sadly, the next morning, when we all sobered up, none of us could remember who had come up with the title Fuck Around Quotient Zero. Coop said it was his. I said it was mine. Lebbon said something, but he talks funny and none of us could understand him. We got in a fight over who had the rights to the name, and thus Fuck Around Quotient Zero was doomed to failure before it ever got off the ground. So we each wrote some horror novels instead. The rest, as they say, is history. The reason I bring all this up is because that very same night, I had another title idea. But unlike Fuck Around Quotient Zero, I kept this title to myself. The title was Kill Whitey. I just needed a story to go with it. For years, I wasn't sure what that story was. I knew there was a guy named Whitey. I knew that people were trying to kill him. I just didn't know why. Then, almost 10 years later, I finally got the idea to go along with that title. The last job I had before I went full-time writer was working on the docks at FedEx, big FedEx facility here in central Pennsylvania off Lewisberry Road. Um, my shift was 4 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock in the morning. I carpooled every day with three other dudes, and we'd get high on the way there and high on the way home because it was just a brutal job. And I should point out, I wasn't driving high. I was a passenger in the back seat. Those were some good times. It was the summer that Dr. Dre's The Chronic came out. I remember that, and we listened to that just nonstop. But it was a brutal, backbreaking, heartbreaking job. And soon enough, The Rising and City of the Dead and Conquer Worms were earning enough royalties that I was able to quit and go full time. Now, we've talked about that in the Secret Histories video for Dark Hollow, so we're not going to get off too into the weeds here. But I knew that location would make a great setting for a novel. Something else we haven't talked about in this series is that I used to know and was on friendly terms with folks from certain ethnic fraternal organizations that might not exactly be legal. Let's put it that way. And I always wanted to do something with some characters based on some of those people. So suddenly I knew who Whitey was. I knew that Whitey was a Russian crime lord. And I knew that he was a descendant of Rasputin and that he couldn't be killed. He was like Jason Voorhees. No matter what you did to him, he couldn't be killed. He would regenerate. And I knew that I didn't want Tony Genova, Tony Genova and Vince Napoli starring in this book. But I wanted this set in their world with their associates. And I wanted just some straight civilians as the protagonists. And that is where I got the idea, the FedEx, loading docks where I used to work, the facility. Let's tie this all together. And then the third piece was Sonia, the exotic dancer, who was indeed based on someone I used to know, someone I dated for, I guess, a summer and a fall, an amicable parting. All those elements came together. And that is where Kill Whitey came from. The book was never my best-selling title, but it was my first trade hardcover release. It was the first time I'd gotten a trade hardcover. All those other hardcovers you've watched so far, those were signed limited editions. And Leisure Books, my mainstream publisher, they did not do original trade hardcovers. They only did mass market paperbacks. So it was a big moment for me. The nice thing about trade hardcovers is that libraries order the shit out of them. So suddenly I had my first actual library book, and it was called Kill Whitey, which caused quite a stir. I can't remember if it was author Andre Duza or Wrath James White. One of them took a photo at the time and put it on MySpace, because MySpace was a thing, of them reading Kill Whitey on a commute to work, and some very uncomfortable looking commuters sitting around them. And I always thought that was fucking hilarious. I wish I still had that photo. Kill Whitey did well. Don't get me wrong. It never sold in the numbers of, The Rising or City of the Dead or Ghoul. But it did do well, and it continues to do well to this day. There are fans and readers among you who cite this as their favorite of my novels, and that's very, very cool. I am fond of this novel as well. It's fun. I think it has a surprising level of romance, of actual romance, uh, considering it's a blue collar dock worker and a Russian stripper. Um, and I think probably along with Ghoul, Dark Hollow, and Ghostwalk, it probably is my best at capturing what life in central Pennsylvania is actually like. So yeah, no complaints about me for Kill Whitey, no embarrassment, no cringe. I love this book, and I love it when people love this book as well. Let's take a look at some of the editions. So Cemetery Dance did 3 editions. They did the signed lettered edition, which came in this box, tray case. Those were the end papers. And then there's the signature sheet. They then did a signed limited edition hardcover and a trade hardcover, which look identical, right? You'll notice one of them, actually, let's take the cover off. Easier to show you. One of them has black binding. The other one has reddish orange binding. Now I can no longer remember which is which, so I'm going to find out with you. All right, yep. The black binding is the signed limited edition. And then the red-orange binding is the regular trade edition. You'll notice the end papers are plain as well. Lots and lots and lots of copies of that trade hardcover in print. Pretty easy to find on eBay in the secondary market, even though it is out of print. Years later, Deadite Press did a trade paperback. Now, I will admit, this has never been my favorite cover. In fact, truth be told, now that this edition is out of print, I really don't like this cover at all. It is what it is. And, you know, we talked in the Jack's Magic Beans and Dark Hollow videos about, you know, Deadite were introducing my books to a second generation of readers, and those readers loved those Deadite covers, and I get that. And I liked a lot of the Deadite covers. I just didn't like this one. I never thought it suited the book. I'll tell you the cover I do love, and that is the one that Keelan Patrick Burke did for the audiobook and the ebook of Kill Whitey. And now that this edition is out of print and the rights have returned to me, I will be releasing it via my own imprint, Manhattan on Mars, later in 2025, closer towards fall. And that edition will include Keelan Patrick Burke's cover. So you can look forward to that. There are a few foreign language editions. Unfortunately, I don't have copies of all of them. The only one I have a copy of is this German trade hardcover. You know how you say Kill Whitey in German? Kill Whitey. I always thought that was kind of neat. And, of course, as I said, the Killing Stages chapbook. Folks have come up to me over the years and, you know, they found this at secondhand books, half-price books, or they got a copy on eBay and they weren't sure what it was. And, well, what it is, as I said, it's a rather lengthy introduction that talks about, you know, the origins of Kill Whitey. And then it's a first chapter from a much earlier draft of the novel. And it's a chapter that is drastically different than the actual published first chapter. But that's all it is. It's something for you completists out there. But if you're not a completist, don't go spending an arm and a leg on this on eBay, okay? Because I just told you what's in it. You decide if that's something you really need to have or not. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. Those of you who have championed Kill Whitey over the years, thank you. That means a lot. As I said, it's one of my personal favorites. Outside, it sounds like it's raining. It's raining again. Oh man, I think that means that we're gonna take a return trip to the world of earthworm gods in our next video. Earthworm gods, selected scenes from the end of the world. We'll see you then. Peace.